place you are at.
And I can't take notes.
You okay?
Right.
By the way, while I'm speaking, do you usually read or do you defer reading till like after the class or like till never?
Uh, Never.
Great. Eventually,
It's a good.
you will. Hmm?
It's a good tactic.
It's a good tactic. Yep, I read somewhere sometime back. If you, I mean, the good thing about important stuff is that if you defer it for a good enough period of time, it's not important anymore. So yeah, was it
Yep.
about important stuff or urgent stuff? But the same rule applies. Okay,
Yep.
sir. 1 second. So we'll have to start with supply. First of all, since you don't have your notes with you, but you still have got your mind, what was the definition of demand? And thinking about the definition of demand, what would be the definition of supply?
Okay. So demand is when there is someone who has the ability to buy your product with the willingness to buy. Someone who has the willingness to buy your product with the ability to buy it. Yes, I remember this.
Very good, very good. So demand we said was the willingness and ability to buy the product. Instead of buy, we will say to sell a product at various price levels in a given period of time. That's it. That's the definition of supply.
Okay. Okay.
You can't even take notes on your PC.
This is a laptop. I can't. No, I won't.
You don't have a
Because
notepad
I
on your
will
laptop.
remember it.
Okay, you will
I will
remember.
remember it.
Okay, so the same way
And
we
you.
had for demand, we said that there is a between quantity demanded. Draw a graph. So, for example, if I draw table for price and quantity demanded, that would be a demand schedule. And if I were to draw,
So the one I did, we did that before, right? So that was price. No, this is supply. We
uh,
studied the last class.
we studied demand in the last class, right?
Yes, but it was price and was it price and demand or price and quantity sold is the same
Price
thing
and
though.
quantity, that was quantity demanded. Here we have quantity supplied.
Okay, okay.
Okay, so quantity demanded and quantity supplied. All right. With this, the next thing, sir, we have is what would be the relationship between price and quantity demanded, quantity supplied? If the price goes up, would the quantity supplied
If
increase
the
or
price goes down,
hmm,
people who are selling would rather buy it because they can sell it for a profit. That's
no, no? What would happen to their selling
it would increase.
when the price goes down? Their selling would increase.
When the price goes down, their selling would increase. Not their selling, like buying.
Their selling. Tell me about the supplier. What would happen to his selling? I'm talking about his selling right now.
Supplier selling would increase.
No, suppliers for a given supplier, when the price goes low, he would be willing to sell less of that product. And when the
He would
price
be willing to sell. Ah, okay. But if the price goes low, then the person who's buying in
that
wholesale or
was for
whatever.
demand. That was for demand.
Okay,
Person who is
okay.
buying, he puts forward demand. Person who is
Okay.
selling, he is giving the quantity supplied. So we'll always have an upward sloping supply curve for uh, upward sloping supply curve for any given product.
Okay.
Whenever the price goes up, so let's say take any product. We took meat as an example last time. So let's say the
Uh-huh.
price is AED 20. The price is in AED. So at 20, let's say he is willing to sell 100
Why he's
kgs.
selling double mutton?
I don't know. Maybe the supply, he himself got it really cheap. There was abundance of beef
Rubber
in
mutton.
wherever he's buying from. And if the price, okay, let's make it 80. And if the price goes up to 90, he is willing to sell 100. Let's make it 500 kgs. quantity is in kgs, so I need not write kgs again and again. He is willing and able to sell 500. Let's increase that to 1500. Okay, so these different quantities applied in supply curve, where the change in price is only causing this movement along the supply curve. That would be a change of quantity supplied and shift of the supply curve. If the supply curve shifts this way, like this to S1, this would be a shift of supply or change of supply. All right. Supply curve shifts rightward, it shows an increase in supply. Why? Here is the proof. At price 90, previously he was willing and able to sell only 500. Now at price 90, he is willing and able to sell 1500. Right?
Uh-huh.
Previously at
But
price
isn't
8,
that bad for him?
we'll see if that's bad for him or not. He's selling more as well.
It is.
I mean, why is
But
it bad
he's
for him?
gaining less for selling. He could sell the same and give away less. So he could sell the remaining for more, if you understand.
I don't get it. At price 90,
So
previously he was selling.
why wouldn't he sell 500 units for 90 instead of selling 1,500 for 90? He could just sell 500 3 times. Could sell 1,500 for double the amount.
We'll see how eventually this price is fixed. We'll see how eventually this price is fixed. We are looking at the supply and demand in isolation over here right now. And the thing is, we'll learn later a concept of economies of scale. When you have to sell in bulk, you have to reduce the rates.
Yeah, I get that. But still,
Okay.
why would it be a good thing is my question. If you're selling for the same price.
The volumes they increase. I mean, you'll have to deal with more customers. We'll get to that when we study the wholesaler and retailer thing. So, for example, a wholesaler, he has got just 5 retailers he sells them to, right? And he sells them to at a price, let's just take this example, 80, 90. So, previously he was selling at 90, but he was selling to 5 different retailers. Okay, and eventually he would sell 500 kgs to each of them. Or let's say he would sell 100 to each of them. Now he has increased the volume of his business, so he wants to sell 1500 kgs. Previously he was selling just 500. To increase his volume to 1500 kgs, he has to convince each of them to let's say buy more from him. So he'll have to give them a discount.
Right.
Okay, or the example of wholesaler or retailer I was about to
No,
give you,
but
from
here
which
you see, right? Here you see in this graph. Wait.
No, each unit.
Oh, okay.
No. For 90, he is selling a total of 500 kgs. So his revenue would be 90 into 500.
Okay, now that makes more sense. Okay, yeah. Okay. Because see,
and when it goes
why would you sell 500 for a whole of 90 and a big good thing to sell 1,500 for 90 instead? Okay.
The revenue, it's the product of the two.
Okay.
All right. So we have got the rightward shift of the supply curve shows an increase in supply, and similarly, had the supply curve shifted from S1 to S, it would have been a decrease in supply. All right. Then the next thing is for quantity supplied. So there is a change of quantity supplied. It is only because of change in price. Only because of change in price there is change of quantity supplied. However, change of supply, that is the shift of the supply curve, is due to a number of reasons. What could be those reasons?
shift of the supply curve would be for very, because if the for from, can you repeat the question?
Why would the supply curve shift from left to right? Or
Uh,
right, why would the supply curve shift at all?
Demand, something to do with demand,
Why at the same price the supplier is willing to sell more?
because it's easier for him to guarantee profits, and also it takes less work
Hmm.
to
The
sell.
first factor is costs.
Uh-huh.
So if cost of supplier they go down,
Right?
he'd be willing to sell more quantity at the same price because now he's making more profit per unit.
Uh-huh.
For example, if he was selling at the price was 500 for some product, and at 500 he would sell 100 units. So his total revenue would be 50,000, correct? And let's say his cost at this particular point was $300. So 300 into 100, 30,000 was his cost. His total profits would be 28,000. Now if his cost goes down to 200, his total
Mm-hmm.
cost would go down to 20,000, and he is making 30,000 at the same price of 500. So now he would be willing to increase the quantity that he is selling.
Can you repeat?
Okay, so for each unit, let me not give you 500. For each unit, he was,
Right.
if the cost goes down, the cost price reduces to, let's say, 200. Now per unit, he is earning 300. So per
Uh-huh.
unit profit has gone up, therefore he is more willing to supply a higher quantity at the same price.
Uh-huh. I got
At
it.
same price, since his costs have reduced, maybe the transportation cost reduced, or the conversion cost of the raw material, or whatever, he started buying things at a lower price. Due to whatever reason, whenever his costs decreases, he would be willing to sell more quantity at the same price because his profits have now increased.
Mm-hmm.
All
Mm-hmm.
right, so the change of supply first factor is
Price less more quantity.
hmm,
Or okay.
same price more quantity, that is increase of supply, right? So you are
Yeah.
a seller. At 500 previously you were willing to sell 1,000 units. Now your costs
Uh-huh.
have gone down. The business is more profitable. So at same price 500 you are willing to sell, let's say, 20,000 or 2,000, from 1,000 to
Why would
2,000.
it be the same? Why wouldn't it drop?
I mean, your costs have reduced, your profits have increased. Why would you
No,
drop?
like
Hmm.
for the for like a discount. How is it a discount then?
It's not a discount.
Like, I mean, okay, so you're not reducing the price for the
Mm-hmm,
other
mm-hmm,
guy.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay, okay, I get it.
Okay, so the first factor of change of supply is costs. So if costs they go up, suppliers would reduce the supply, and if
Uh,
costs they go down, suppliers would increase the supply.
uh-huh. We were studying investment appraiser.
Hmm.
So that's how I was thinking about discounts for some reason. Okay.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Uh, Over there, in fact, in investment appraisal, discount is something that's discount factor.
Yeah,
The discount over there is not the price
I
discount
didn't,
that we are talking about. That's
I
the
didn't
compound
understand
interest
when
thing.
she
Hmm.
explained. She's a very confusing teacher. We had two teachers, by the way, teaching us
Same thing.
one unit. No, half of the unit one teacher taught, other half the other teacher taught. But now we convinced the thing, whoever the head is, to make it one teacher, the one we like, and she did it. So we start with that teacher this
So
week.
you have made a person unemployed.
No, she still teaches another class.
So you have caused demotion of a teacher.
It wasn't demotion. She won't have any reduction of
Hmm,
anything.
hmm.
She
What,
just doesn't
what,
teach our class.
whatever helps you fall asleep at night.
Nah,
Okay.
What? What? No. Why would, in the first place, why would there be two teachers teaching in the same unit? I don't get it. Same unit.
Specialization.
There's no
A
specialization.
teacher
They
has
just,
specialized in
they
certain
realized
topics.
they didn't even know that they had another teacher. It was a timetable thing. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding.
Uh-huh.
They didn't know
Uh-huh.
that they each other existed. And when we told them, they were so surprised. They were
Okay.
shocked actually. And
Okay.
then we went and complained.
Mm-hmm.
Because we kept telling each teacher, like, oh, the other teacher taught us this, other teacher taught us that. But they never understood what we meant. She thought it was like last year or something.
Mm-hmm.
Then she realized and she was like,
How
what?
many how many students do you have in your business class?
Four, that's it.
Mm, nice. Okay, didn't you convince a lot of people from your physics class to switch to business?
Yeah, two.
Just
Otherwise,
two?
they would just be one. Yeah, so three of us
So the
switched.
rest of them are just continuing with physics.
Uh, just one of them is continuing with physics.
How many did you have in the physics class?
Wait, no, no, no. I mean, like, one of them is taking business and physics.
Okay. I mean, how many did you have in your physics class?
I don't know. It was like 16, 20, I don't know.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Okay, what is this?
The
Sampling of
next
supply.
factor of change of supply, the next factor which causes a change in supply is
Eh?
technology. So with new technology, usually your costs of production go down. Initially, you have to make some big investment to acquire this new technology, but over the period of life of that technology, that cost it gets spread out, and eventually the purpose of introducing this new technology is usually to reduce the cost of production. It could be because it replaces labor, it could be that it reduces the losses or wastages in the process, it could be that it,
Or unemployed people, which is also fun.
which is also fun for some. Anyways, discussing it from the supplies point of view, the technology it reduces the cost, we know it would help the producer increase the supply. Okay, what other thing can cause a change in supply, sir? There is this concept of indirect
Water taxes. I don't
tax.
know.
Tax is the amount of money that government collects from its citizens. Either they charge it on the incomes, which is usually the case, and that is called direct tax. And sometimes the tax is levied on some activity. If you do this activity, you have to pay this tax. Indirect taxes fall in that category.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so when you have got indirect taxes, uh, the indirect taxes, I mean, it depends on how much detail is given later on in your syllabus, but indirect taxes they can increase the cost of supplier. There is this question of indirect tax. How much of this indirect tax are you going to, being a supplier, how much of its effect are you going to sustain on your own, and how much of it are you going to pass on to the consumer? So
Uh-huh.
with demand and supply, again, I'm not sure if this thing, yes, this thing would come in later on. With demand and supply, there is a thing called elasticity. So there are a case that there are certain goods for which demand is perfectly inelastic. No much, no matter how much the price goes up or price goes down, the quantity demanded is fixed.
Right.
This is called perfectly inelastic demand.
Inelastic demand.
Perfectly inelastic. The degrees
Okay.
of inelasticity we'll see later on, but for now just remember this is perfectly inelastic. Any example of such thing? A close example is life-saving drugs. So for example, if a doctor prescribes a life-saving drug to, or a certain amount
That's
of,
not true.
so people they give more and less of life-saving drugs based on how cheap or expensive they are.
The ambulance thing I told you.
The ambulance thing, oh, we have had discussion over this before for demand.
Yeah.
So it's the same for supply. For supply, we have also got perfectly inelastic supply. No matter what, you have to. I mean, you just supply this good. So it could be there are factors which cause
Why?
the
Why?
um. If the good is perishable, for example, you can't hold on to it for
Perishable.
long. So
Okay.
if you keep it with you, it's going to rot. So whatever the price you just that is
Why
usually
get it in the first place then?
some goods are by nature perishable. For example, milk.
No, but why get that good in the first place
I mean,
in your possession?
why being in the business of selling that good in the first place?
Yeah.
Somebody has to supply that good. I mean, every good that we have, somebody has to eventually supply.
Yeah.
There is
Okay.
a
Whatever.
market gap. There is a, and uh, the reason that, let's say, that a lot of people, they do not get into this business. Maybe you can charge higher prices because people still need this good.
Yeah.
Market, how eventually it settles on price, we'll look at that in a bit, and there are a lot of factors to it. But
Mhm.
for now, we are just saying that for certain goods, and one example is perishable goods, where the suppliers, they cannot change this. And the perishable goods that we had, I mean, look at these fruits and vegetables. Let's go back 50 years, and there wasn't such technology which allowed us to store these goods for a lot of time. There, the perishability was higher, and the inelasticity in the supply was higher. But now, since the new advent of, I mean, with new technology of refrigeration being abundantly available to the suppliers and these fruit sellers, they can now store goods for longer period of time, and
Right.
their supply has become relatively less inelastic.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
how does it relate to all this discussion about taxes that we initiated? For taxes, remember that indirect tax, it's levied on activity. In our case, indirect tax, we are saying that like in UAE's government some year back, it imposed this VAT. That's an indirect
Right.
tax, the tax that you have to pay when you purchase or sell something. Now,
Right.
you being the supplier, would you rather bear the burden of tax yourself, or would you pass
No.
it on to the consumer?
Consumer.
If the supply is inelastic, if the supply is inelastic, you would likely bear the uh, burden on your.
If it's inelastic, it'll be consumer. If it's elastic, then it'll be on you
How
because
about
then he
demand?
might not
How
buy.
about demand? If demand is perfectly inelastic, then you will pass on to the consumer. But if the demand is elastic, then the more elastic it is, the more the burden you'll bear.
Right.
If demand is inelastic, the more inelastic the demand is, the easier it is for you to pass on the burden of tax onto the consumers.
Uh-huh. For supply, what is it?
For supply, let me think. If supply is inelastic, no matter if the price is high or low, it depends more on demand, whether I can pass it on to the consumer or not.
Uh-huh. Uh,
For supply, I am indifferent. I'd rather pass, being a supplier, I'd rather pass it on to the consumer. But even if I had to bear it, I will bear it. If it's inelastic supply, if
if
it's
it
in,
is elastic.
if it is inelastic, if supply is
Right.
inelastic, I mean, I would ideally pass it on to the consumer. But if I cannot, I still have to supply this product, so I'll bear it.
Right.
If the
Mm,
supply is elastic, the more elastic it is, the more willing I would be to pass it on to the consumer, or the more feasible it would be for me to pass it on to the consumer, the burden of tax,
the more elastic it is.
the more elastic it is.
Okay.
Okay. uh, the same is the case of subsidies. So subsidies, subsidies. Subsidy is when the government, it reduces. Okay, here's how subsidy works. Subsidy is, in effect, it has the opposite impact of tax. In indirect taxes, the government is charging you money over some activity. In subsidy, the government gives suppliers some money for some activity. Why would it give them some money? Because it wants to encourage that activity, or it wants to encourage some behavior. So let's say to reduce, let's say the price of people, it wants to reduce the price for flour. Let's say you being a flour mill, you are selling a bag of flour.
Can you say flour, please?
Flour. You
Yes. Floor is floor.
use.
Zamin.
All right, got it. So a bag of flour, you're selling it for, how much does it cost?
Yeah, I don't know.
Let's say 70 dirhams.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. uh, the government asks you to sell it for 50 dirhams. You'll say that I can't sell it for 60. My own price, my own cost of producing this bag of flour is 60. So if I sell it for 50, I'll be running a
So,
loss.
is the supplier also the producer?
Let's assume in this simple example, yes.
Okay.
Wouldn't make a difference though.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the government wants you to sell this bag of flour for 50 dirhams,
Mm-hmm.
whereas it costs you 60 dirhams to produce it. The government will say you sell it for 50, the loss or
Mm-hmm.
the lost profit of dollar 20 of the dirham 20. We will pay you that as subsidy.
What? They will do that?
So we'll do what?
The government will do that.
The government will pay the seller the dollar 20 as subsidy for reducing
I'm
the price.
assuming this is very rare.
This usually it's not very rare. Subsidies are common. They are usually given over food products.
Ah, okay, understandable.
All right.
So that the poor can eat. That.
In government sector, for example, even the education, the government sector, most of the goods they are providing, they are at subsidized rates. So you see the same product if you are buying from, for example, this education is cheaper at government schools. Healthcare is
Uh,
cheaper at government hospitals. There, the
hmm.
healthcare is subsidized.
My dad was in a government hospital. So
Mm,
yes, the prices are usually
so
cheaper.
you can discuss subsidy with him over dinner as well tonight. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. These are three main factors which cause the change of supply, shift of supply curve. Other factors, for example, they may include, uh, let's call them external shocks. So in external shocks, we have example of mm, let's say world events. Let's call it. So, for example, the country which used to provide you supply, you used to rely on the supply of a certain good was actually imported. A large chunk of it was imported from certain country. Or let's take example of this oil. If there is political instability in the Arab world, the global supply of oil will be disturbed, and the supply of oil would reduce. The prices of oil would go up.
Yeah.
Okay. Another example of these external your supply would be increased if you happen to have less favorable weather, your supply might decrease.
Okay. What if a farmer, right, was to have all his crops destroyed?
Hmm.
Okay. But
Do you know in I've heard in Denmark and these Scandinavian countries, a good chunk of their export they rely a lot on dairy products for their for their economy, and a lot of
okay.
their local producers they are involved in this dairy business. Each year they would have milk and these products milk specifically thrown in sea
Mm,
so that the supply isn't too much. There is this problem, this sort of what's it called paradox of bumper crop. So being a farmer you would wish to sell more quantity, but if you have more quantity the
price would.
supply would increase and the prices would crash.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, wouldn't it be good for the other farmers if one of the farmers' crops got destroyed?
It's a paradox. I mean, you go to another extreme saying that other farmers crops get
So
destroyed.
if I were to be a farmer, okay, and
If
I
you were in any business, you would wish
miss,
for your competitors to fail. The crux
I
of your
mean,
thinking is that
yes. So if I were to start a farm right now, okay, and
not
then
related to farm. If you are a
and then
doctor, maybe
and
you'd
then
wish that
start
all other.
acid rain
Hmm, hmm,
all over India, then I would be the richest farmer alive.
hmm. True, true.
That's
All
a
right,
smart
all
businessman.
right. The
Don't
government,
steal my idea. Just saying.
hmm, not into the business of creating acid rains. Okay.
Okay.
So for example, the
Your loss.
government it might encourage certain activity by way of nudge or by otherwise. I mean, taxes and subsidies we have already discussed. So maybe by
The government gives subsidies more, or do they threaten more? Which one is it?
indirect taxes are used more often than subsidies, at least in Pakistan.
No, not like threaten you. Like do this or I'll
Threaten,
ban your
threaten,
company.
threaten. The thing is that goes to the concept of command economy. Then in free market economy, the sort of economy we usually have around the globe, except for the few countries and many of them
Here we
also.
have Etisalat and do only as our
It's different in
uh,
UAE. For example, in India, in UK, in USA, in Pakistan, we have in the Western world we have like a lot of more free market economy. In again, perfect, not perfect. Free market economy in 100% sense does not exist anywhere in the world. Similarly, command economy in 100% bookish sense of it doesn't exist anywhere in the world. It's just that some
mhm,
economies they're closer to the concept of command economy and some they're closer to the concept of free market economy. But they're all largely fixed mixed economies. And some of them lie in the middle. Some of them are
mhm.
more tilted towards the free market or more. The free market economy is supposed to have no government intervention.
Uh-huh.
There isn't any
Uh-huh.
country in which there is no government intervention. For example, the drug price regulation, the
Uh-huh.
pharma price regulation, almost happens everywhere.
Right.
Similarly, some regulation over how to dispel education and healthcare, and I mean the government has to intervene. So that the problem with free market economy, the reason this concept of a command economy it evolved or it came into being was the exploitation which used to happen in free market economies.
These socialists, they don't like exploitation. Pathetic.
Hmm. Okay. So government they can encourage or discourage behavior by way of nudge theory or by way of legislation. For example, the government it wants to limit smoking or it
Right.
wants to limit the countries which produce cigarettes. So it would impose a lot of regulations that you have to comply with if you want to be in the big business of making cigarettes. Would
Uh-huh.
automatically, I mean, the more regulated a certain sector is, the less the supply.
Mm-hmm.
Regulation is one of the factors, and so on. So the government they can influence supply of a certain product, and then price of related goods. They can also affect supply of a. So if your competitors you happen to know is increasing prices,
Uh-huh.
you'd increase your supply because you would know that more people they'd be coming to buy your product.
Indeed.
Similarly, if let's say a compliment becomes expensive, you would automatically foresee that the demand for your product is going down, and maybe you'll reduce the supply accordingly as well.
Huh?
So, if for example you're selling shoes and you know, or you're selling socks and you know shoes have become expensive, you'll know that the demand for socks is also going to decrease. So, you decrease the supply of socks as well.
Ah, okay, okay.
Okay,
So
now
it was that this thing substitute something demand and this thing.
substitutes and complements, yes.
Ah, yes. Okay.
Okay, so the way a market works is by interaction of demand and supply. We have studied this demand and supply in isolation. Let's see how they come about in action together. So price and quantity. So here is demand of a
What
certain
is
product.
quantity?
What is quantity? Quantity we
Yeah,
are
like
plotting
price
both.
of quantity of supply. Okay.
We're plotting both over here.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the point where the demand and supply curve intersect each other, this is called the point of equilibrium.
Equilibrium.
Okay, and we denote it with a simple E. And this quantity which is represented by this point of equilibrium is equilibrium quantity, and this price is equilibrium price.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
the equilibrium point is the only point of stability in a market. So at any other point other than equilibrium, the market won't be stable and it would automatically move towards equilibrium. Let's see. Let's say the prices, instead of being at PE, they are fixed at P1. So at this P1, since the prices are lower, I labeled them wrong. So this is supply and that is demand. So this
Wow.
is
How could you?
supply. This is demand. Okay.
Scam
So
academy,
at
but
price P1, there would be fewer suppliers who are willing to supply the product since the prices are lower. So this, let me call Q QS dash, and this quantity demanded, since prices are lower, there would be a higher quantity demanded. So let me call this QD dash. So there is more quantity demanded and less quantity supplied. There would be a shortage in market equal to this.
right.
Okay. So to overcome this shortage, the suppliers, they'd say, all right, we'll supply you more quantity if you pay us higher prices. And as prices go up, there would be fewer consumers who would be willing to buy the product, and eventually it would revert back to this point of equilibrium.
Uh-huh.
Let's see the case if prices are fixed above equilibrium, what would happen. So if prices are fixed above equilibrium, so fixing prices below equilibrium caused a shortage in the market. Fixing prices above the equilibrium, who are willing to buy the product, so let's call it QD dash, and there would be more suppliers who are willing to sell the product, or suppliers would be willing to supply higher quantities. Let's call this QS dash. So there is more quantity supplied than there is quantity demanded, meaning thereby that there is a
Low shortage.
when prices were fixed below equilibrium, they caused a
Shortage
shortage in
and
the market,
surplus.
and this causes fixing prices above equilibrium. It causes a surplus in the market.
Shortage, surplus. Okay.
Obviously, at this particular point, people would say that all right, we'll buy more only if the prices were lower.
Uh-huh.
And if there are lower
Uh-huh.
prices, there would be lesser quantity being sold by the suppliers, and eventually the things that come back to equilibrium. That is the point at which the quantity supplied with the quantity which the suppliers are willing to supply is equal to the quantity which the consumers are willing to buy. So everything they get sold, it gets sold.
Blah blah blah. Okay, whatever.
Another thing, if you are ever to determine the total revenue of the market, it would be equal to total revenue will be equal to price into quantity. Simple.
Total revenue.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now we'll see that what would be the effect of change in demand on market equilibrium. These are important things. I wish you noted these and drew these graphs as well, but
I mean, draw a graph, draw X middle equilibrium, and then the one that's going upwards is
uh,
supply, one going downward is demand.
uh, okay.
I
Hmm.
remember, sir, my memory is really bad, but I remember.
Okay.
I remember
So
things that I'm interested in.
sloping demand curve, upward sloping supply curve.
Right.
Now we'll see what would, so this, let me call this equilibrium point. This is QE. How do we denote an increase in demand? The demand curve, it shifts rightwards. So if for
Right.
some reason the demand for a product increases to D1, there would be a new equilibrium point E1, Q1, and the prices would rise to P1. So
Right.
if there is increase in demand, if there is
Mm-hmm.
increase in demand, the market prices go up, and the equilibrium quantity, or the quantity of trading happening in the market, that increases.
Right.
All right. And
Right.
reverse would be the case of decrease of supply. So if supply it decreases from D1 to D, the equilibrium shifts
Uh-huh.
from E1 to E. The prices they drop from P1 to P, and the quantity traded in the market it drops from Q1 to QE.
Uh-huh.
So increase in demand causes increase in price and increase in quantity, equilibrium quantity. And decrease in demand it causes a decrease in equilibrium quantity and a decrease in equilibrium price.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Uh, the next case is that of supply, change of supply. So I've got quantity over here, I've got price over here, downward sloping demand curve, upward sloping supply curve. So if supply were to increase, this all right. Uh, this had an equilibrium point E. Let me write that over here. This is the point E. This is the equilibrium quantity QE, and this is the equilibrium price PE. If the supply were to increase, the curve would shift which way?
Supply were to increase rightwards.
Rightwards. So this is increase of supply S1. So if supply of a product increases, before me even telling you that prices would, I mean before me even showing you this graph, when we discussed the example of bumper crops, you automatically knew by intuition that if supply of any product were to increase, its price would go down. But this is how we
Yeah.
can represent it graphically.
Right.
But not only the price it goes down, equilibrium price, it also results in increase in case of demand. When demand decreased, the prices went down, but the equilibrium quantity also went down. In case of demand, let me draw that quickly over here. So this is, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was saying that when supply increases, the
Uh-huh.
equilibrium price goes down, equilibrium quantity increases. When demand decreases, that also causes a decrease in price, but that is coupled with decrease in quantity as well.
Uh-huh.
So just
Uh-huh.
remember how to draw these graphs and life would be simple. Also for this supply curve, if we were to imagine what would be the case if supply were to decrease, if cost of suppliers
Uh-huh.
went up, or the country went to war, or there was some supply shock in the world. um, for example, oil or whatever commodity, the supply curve would shift leftwards, equilibrium would shift from
Uh-huh.
E1 to E, the
Uh-huh.
equilibrium prices would go up, and the quantity
Uh-huh.
consumed or the quantity traded would reduce.
Repeat that.
When supply it shifts from S1 to S, which is decrease in supply. With
Uh-huh.
decrease in supply, the equilibrium prices would go up and equilibrium quantity would reduce.
Uh-huh.
And if there is an increase in supply from S to S1, the equilibrium prices would go down and equilibrium quantity would increase.
Okay. Okay.
Hmm. All right, all right, all right, all right. All right. What have we got next? Hmm. The next thing is price elasticity of demand. Price elasticity of demand.
So let's get this straight, okay?
Hmm.
If the supply curve increases, then the equilibrium quantity of equilibrium increases. Correct?
1 second, please repeat.
If the supply increases.
Okay.
If the supply curve increases, so it went from S to S1.
Hmm.
Here it's increasing, right?
Hmm.
So that means that the quantity of equilibrium would also increase.
Hmm.
Okay, and for
And
demand,
prices would go down. Prices would go down.
prices would go down, and for demand, uh, it would be that if the demand would go up, if the demand would increase, then
I'll do a
what would
simple
happen?
thing. I'll do a simple thing.
Can you draw
Um,
the demand? Can you draw D1 increase in
what I'll
demand?
do is I'll draw these four cases on four slides, and you can copy
Okay,
them later
but
on when you get to your
can you
home.
draw
I'll draw all
demand?
four. I'll draw all four.
Is it going to be more? Is it going to be above the current demand, or is it going to be below? D1. Where would D1 go? Just show me right now so I can have peace of mind.
Hmm. Um. Okay. I'll draw four. You want me to draw which one?
D1. You should have
Quantity.
just drawn it on that graph.
Draw on the same graph.
Yeah, just draw it on the same graph, another color.
If the demand were to go up,
Yeah,
from where? From E or from E1?
from E.
From E. So if demand
There
were,
is only one demand curve, right?
hmm.
So
So the new
what
demand,
that demand make it D1,
hmm,
increase it.
D1.
Right, okay. So that would mean that the equilibrium here would also increase.
Hmm. By equilibrium, do you mean equilibrium quantity or equilibrium price?
Quantity, quantity.
Yes, when demand increases, equilibrium quantity as well as equilibrium price both increase.
Okay, but for supply it's only equilibrium quantity.
When supply increases, yes,
Okay, but equilibrium price decreases.
it causes a price decrease, correct?
For demand, it's both increase. Okay, got it.
So it shifted this way as well as this way. For the equilibrium of supply, when supply increased, it was this way and this way.
Right.
Hmm. What ideally you should do is, or let's have that as homework on your Jamboard. Draw four graphs. One is, I mean, you'll
I
have
got it. I got it.
for all four graphs, you'll have to show an initial equilibrium position, okay, and later one graph is for increase. The second one would be for decrease in demand
Okay.
in supply.
Uh-huh.
So just draw these four graphs as your
Uh-huh.
homework and on four slides of Jamboard, and then we are good. I'm leaving first
Okay.
four slides as it is, writing the next thing on the fifth slide.
Okay.
Okay, so the next thing that we have is, it's a new chapter. Shall I start it today? We
I
have
mean, you
we
can
have
start.
we have already covered two, but let's see. Let's study for a bit more. There is this concept of price elasticity of demand,
Okay.
and as um, price elasticity of demand, responsiveness, or its measure of responsiveness of quantity demanded of a product, hmm, to a change in its price. I'll
What is the
explain in a
second?
bit. To a change in its price. So there are two products, and for both of them, the price rises by 5%. Would the quantity demanded of both of these change by the same amount?
You repeat?
There are two products, product A.
Uh-huh.
and product B. The price of
Uh,
both products, it has went up by 5%. Would would the decrease in would the change in quantity demanded of both the products be same, or it could be different?
I don't know.
It could be different. So for example, if price of, let's say iPhones go up by 5% and the
Right,
price of Cheetos go up by 5%, Cheetos or Lays, whatever,
right. It wouldn't make sense.
for both of them it wouldn't make a difference.
Yeah,
For, let's say, Doritos and Cheetos, if it went up by 5%, would it be the same for both of them?
no.
So that tells you that the responsiveness of their quantity demanded of both of these products, it's different to same change in price.
Uh-huh.
Let's start this topic from tomorrow because it has got a lot of details which rather be covered together. We'll start from here tomorrow. I'll repeat this thing tomorrow. Price elasticity of demand. All right.
Sure. And just